I shall now begin telling you a fairy tale. But as they say, there is a grain of truth in every fairy tale. Greetings and salutations, friends! Today we shall begin discussing one of my all-time favorite topics, a series renowned and beloved by millions around the world, the fantasy jewel of Central Europe, the Witcher Saga. In the following 100 or so videos I shall strive to explain to you as best as I can the setting, story, characters and themes of the saga, so that until Netflix finally releases its series, you can sate your appetite for knowledge and stories with my work. But first, some context and rules for the future. First off, what exactly comprises the Witcher Saga? A good and somewhat difficult question. The Witcher Saga originally was conceived by Polish author Andrzej Sapkowski in the 80s, comprising 2 books of gathered short stories, 5 books of the main saga of Geralt and Ciri, a prequel story penned years after the main series conclusion, and a humorous wedding story which Sapkowski wrote for the lulz, basically, and which is sadly considered non-canon by the author, a sort of fanfiction except written by Sapkowski himself. Except for the latter, all of these are considered canon and will therefore be the main focus of these videos. However, this is where things get complicated, since we now enter the realm of the Witcher games by CD Projekt Red. Now, The Witcher has been adapted before into both TV and games, but it was only when Sapkowski sold the rights to the series and characters to CD Projekt Red that things became really interesting. Because you see, Sapkowski didn't, and to this day, doesn't care much about the games, except him when he wants his money from them, but that is a topic that will probably be getting its own separate video. He had watched parts of the first game, but due to being from the older generation and generally just being a, let's be cordial and say difficult person to get around, he still considers games to be a subpar form of medium. Which is honestly sad, because in my opinion, to this day, The Witcher 3 in particular and the Witcher game series, all in all, remain some of the most faithful adaptation of any fantasy material from book to any other form of medium, and not because they adapt directly what is stated in the books, but because the spirit of the books and characteristics of the various characters, events and settings remain almost exactly as they are in the books. However, due to Sapkowski not being familiar with the events of the games and the book series having its own fairly conclusive conclusion to the legend of Geralt and Ciri, we arrive at a sort of bizarre tie in that the events of the games are neither strictly canon or non-canon. Well, the events of the games are definitely non-canon if you ask Sapkowski, but many Witcher fans do consider the games semi-canon in that they do not negate anything that happened in the books, and like they still could happen. They do not break the lore in almost any way, not in big ways. The entire issue is open to interpretation, so that is exactly what we're going to do. Unlike certain communities where fans of the books and fans of the adaptation always clash due to the adaptation being a direct interpretation of the source material, or supposed to be anyway, Aragon. Fans of the Witcher Saga have it a bit easier due to the games being a continuation of the books rather than displaying the events of the books themselves. Granted, many events and characters in the games serve as homage to the originals in the books, but that does not exclude the canonicity of either. As always, there are some contradictions and changes, mainly around the design of the monsters and creatures, which the games portray often quite differently from the books, but major things such as characters, events, relations, and setting remain untouched and in quite a few ways improved upon by CD Projekt Red. My approach, therefore, will be the following. I will initially try and cover as much of the book series as possible to prepare you for the Witcher Netflix series, doubtlessly based off the books. This means that game-only characters and events will only be covered in the distant future, yet the characters that appear in both games and novels will have their game lore worked into their already canon book lore in a way that I hope will make sense and be consistent with the story continuum. For example, Duchess Anna Henrietta, the ruler of Toussaint in the books, an extremely minor, comical character, very one-dimensional, not a whole lot of backstory or depth to her. In the games was expanded to a fully fledged, three-dimensional character with a very interesting backstory and some surprising character growth. So that is exactly what I'm talking about when I say that the Witcher games kind of naturally, organically expand upon the universe in a way that I personally really liked. So, with characters that have their origins in the books but are expanded upon in the games, I will mention their game lore as well. The purely game characters I think will be relegated to distant future, if ever, for the types of videos you will be seeing. There will be several kinds of videos on my channel you may find concerning the Witcher Saga. I will be dividing them into 4 kinds for now. Character profiles, discussing individual characters, their roles, personalities, motivations, and real-world inspirations behind them. Walking the world, discussing the various parts of the Witcher world in a geopolitical sense, as well as their real-world inspirations. The Saga Unveiled, discussing the various events and groups of the series, and finally, A Witcher's Bestiary, describing the wide variety of monsters found in a Witcher world, as well as their roots in Slavic and Norse folklore, and, most importantly, the Witchers themselves, which are bound to be the first topics after the introductory videos, so you can start looking forward to that. I will also try and stay out of spoiler territory in most of my videos, and whenever I do decide to spoil something from the books, be sure that you will be warned and can pause the video as you deem fit. Only a few of my videos will be downright spoilers themselves, as in they will cover material that itself spoils the events of the novels, and just as in the previous example, you will always be made aware of that. But, I hear you ask, what even is this whole Witcher saga? What is it about? Why should I waste my time with it? What are its themes, its meaning and message? What new does it bring to the table in a world where it seems every author with the pen in his hand and paper before him can pen a huge fantasy world that seems to be just another ripoff of Tolkien or Moorcock? The Witcher saga is, at its core, a family drama. Now, before you roll your eyes and shut down the video, be sure I am not comparing it to any of the dreary pieces of heresy you people call sitcoms or reality shows, but rather it is an insanely complicated and often very emotional story about a group of people, all societal outcasts in a sense, though each in a different way and for a different reason, coming together in a time of war and content. To say that the saga is a character-driven story would be a massive understatement, and I can assure you that my character videos will be the juiciest and probably the most entertaining videos on the channel. Wars, politics, monsters and crime all serve merely as background noise to the complex character dynamics and evolution. Ultimately, from the first short story until the last chapter of the last novel, the main theme is definitely love, family, and harshness of life in which they exist. Whether it is Geralt and Yennefer figuring out what exactly they mean to each other, or whether it's Geralt nearly freezing to death searching for Ciri, a child he has come to call his daughter, the story emphasizes multiple times that when all others have betrayed you, family, for better or worse, will be the only ones who will take care of you and support you, even if they do not share your blood, and even if you have had disagreements and fights. This is best personified in the loose yet firm familiar bonds between Ciri, Geralt, and Yennefer, the 3 main characters, and also in Geralt's Hansa, a group of individuals who, while each crazy in their own way, become throughout the story bound by bonds stronger than money, power, and even blood. Just as in A Song of Ice and Fire, The Witcher has no discernible good guys or bad guys. There is no Dark Lord, no knight in shining armor, and no damsel in distress, or no, definitely not the last one. There is an evil emperor, an evil warlock, a money-hungry assassin, but none of them are cartoons or one-dimensional. All of them have at least a speck of humanity and decency still buried inside them, and motivations of some of the villains are actually somewhat admirable. Same thing holds for the other side, seeing as our main characters and other protagonists are filled with flaws and old habits they have to overcome, developing new ones along the way, and we watch some of them commit some downright evil things as the story progresses. Another large part of the story is fate, or to be more specific, whether there is such a thing as fate. Is the future written in stone? Do you have to try to do something to make things happen? These questions are asked throughout the novels, with some characters being firm believers, some ardent unbelievers, and some progressing from one to the other. There are definitely many events in the saga that seem to indicate the Nords themselves want certain events to come to pass, but do they really? That is mostly up to you to decide, and this is another great part of Sapkowski's writing. He always tries to show both sides of the coin. No matter how serious or presently relevant the issue may be, Sapkowski almost always takes the time and effort to present a counterpoint to each of the points he raised. Doubtless, there are some problems and discussions in the books that come off as a bit one-sided, and they do stick out like sore thumbs, safe to say. And this is another great phenomenon of the novels, in that in between action and descriptions there are huge chunks of dialogue, usually involving two characters with opposing opinions, trying to wrestle each other into submission verbally. Usually. Now granted, while sometimes placed a bit jarringly and in my humble opinion often stifling the plot, most of these discussions are very well worth it, and the morals and examples in them can many times be successfully and effortlessly transplanted into our real-world Western problems and highly discussed topics. This has the effect of making the book sometimes dramatically slowed down, even in the middle of action, for example, and this is why the books are not for every reader, because some people will definitely find them a bit boring or lacklusterly paced, but some people will find it refreshing and entertaining, doubtless. These topics that are discussed often include eternal problems of mankind, foremost amongst them being war, justice, and the innate corruption of humans. The innate unfairness and hopelessness of the world is often presented and discussed. Scenes of war are depicted extremely graphically and realistically, and contrasting them are often beautiful sceneries of nature or architecture demolished in conflict. Another huge issue is social prejudice, held by both the oppressors and the oppressed. Most of the main characters are, as already mentioned, societal outcasts, due either to their race, or in some cases species, profession, background, or nature. It critiques societies and groups, both naive and pragmatic, straightforward and clandestine, authoritarian and liberal, materialist and fundamentalist. All of this is layered with a healthy dose of sarcasm and irony, with just a sprinkling of nihilism on top, so you may rest assured that even in the bleak world of The Witcher, laughter still rings true, even in times of trouble. To contrast these grim themes, there are also plenty of compassionate, caring, and sometimes downright lovely characters, who inspire humanity and decency in the less morally straight, shall we say, personas. And in these contrasts lies another one of the great themes of The Witcher. What is good and what is evil? For in the books, evil often looks quite charming and beautiful, even devilishly handsome and extremely intelligent and charismatic, while good puts on a rough, scarred, boorish face of a grumpy and ill-mannered man. Looks deceive, however. Yet are there even such things as good and evil, and should a man choose between them? After all, some villains have noble or at least rational causes for their actions, and the actions of some heroes cause even greater suffering and misery than they were originally trying to prevent. Does evil and good then stem from intent? who can say for sure? Sapkowski certainly can't, and for the most part, that is why he always, or almost always, presents a counterpoint to his every point. Finally, it is a story about finding yourself and your true purpose, about discovering who you really are. We see this with Ciri, whom we get to see mature and evolve over long periods of time, and with Geralt, whom we see slowly but surely shed the identity he had been wearing for years, in favor of something new and different and arguably better. Ultimately, no one can say for sure which one of the two of them is truly the main character. There is, however, one scene, one epic scene, and you who have read The Lady of the Lake know what scene I'm talking about, that might very well answer all of these questions. Or not. As they say, do not mistake the sky for its reflection in the water. It may have all ended differently, we might have gotten it all wrong. And that is the beauty of The Witcher, for it is a true story, a true legend, one you can discuss forever and ever and ever, and never actually find the answers you are looking for. Or you can take some of the morals in the books and live your life according to them, or you can reject them, disagree with them, and even try to argue against them. It is all your choice. However, while I have an eternity to discuss these things with you, you sadly probably do not. Therefore, I shall try and tell you all you need to know to get a grasp of the series and its main themes, without descending into a mania of searching for details and studying what may and may not actually be there. That said, I have to mention some flaws of the series. Sapkowski often treats his story as a legend. That means he often has characters from the future talk about events from the story they remember, or have even read about centuries later. This can be highly frustrating, since it does often not provide us with a detailed or even unbiased version of events. This hurts any attempt to analyze the event in question, and can sometimes be a little bit annoying, since it trades first-hand action for third-hand description of an event, which, doubtless for anyone trying to actually see the action in progress, can be a bit of a blue ball, you might say. Fortunately, most scenes in the books are depicted directly, so this is only a minor nuisance that can for the most part be filled in with logical thinking. The bigger issue is that Sapkowski has also almost criminally underdeveloped many parts of his story which he considers trivial or not significant overall, which has led us to having a somewhat half-done and sometimes contradictory world. Fortunately, this is where CD Projekt Red comes into play, and I will be using their lore and ideas to fill in these gaps. And then of course there is the issue with the author himself, because while Sapkowski definitely is a brilliant writer, no two ways about it, he also isn't the... how could you say it? The easiest of people to remain around, or even generally have a decent conversation. We in Central Europe have a specific term for these kinds of people, which I can't really translate for you into English, but he is a very unique kind of person. The mythology of The Witcher draws heavily from Slavic and Norse mythology, Shakespeare's plays, great works of realism and romanticism, and to a certain extent from modern history. Names of certain places and characters are homages to older ones of real-world places, and many of the initial tales are simply perverted, twisted versions of classic folk tales such as The Beauty and the Beast or Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which put a dark twist on the legend and feature a witcher as the main problem solver. Later on, connections to our world become more... shall we say corporeal in form. That's going to be a juicy video when we discuss that. Anyhow, the Witcher world is in some things very similar or even identical to ours, and in some things completely and utterly alien and foreign. Yet both of these things seamlessly blend into a fun and interesting experience for any fans of the fantasy genre. I hope this had given you a brief insight into the type of beast the Witcher Saga is, and I sincerely hope you stick around for the ride, because we're just getting started. And to start off, what's better to discuss than the world of The Witcher itself, in all its monstrous glory? But that, my friends, is a story for another day. Until then, Godspeed.
At the end of the path, I rest my